Welcome. Thank you for joining us here in the Lower Merion Academy building for today's program on the archives of the Women's Club of Bala Cynwyd. I'm Erin Betley, Secretary of the Lower Merion Historical Society and Chair of our Collections Committee. I'll be providing some brief context for today's presentation and then introducing our speaker. So I welcome you on behalf of the Society. Since 1949, the Society has served as a vital force in preserving and stewarding the rich heritage of Lower Merion and Narberth through the collection of historical items and documents that are all housed above us on the second floor of this building, as well as through community education, programs, and events just like this. I first became aware that the archives of the Women's Club were in the basement of the Levering Mill Tribute House several years ago. I arranged a visit and immediately recognized how valuable these archives are and how important it is that they're properly stored and they're made accessible to the community. We worked with Gambescia, who you'll hear from shortly, president of the club, to explore the possibility that the archives could become part of our collection. In 2023, we worked with a group of students from Lower Merion High School to do a very basic inventory of the materials. In parallel with this, a student at the University of Delaware named Bria Scarlett did a research project using the archives to focus on the club's activities during World War I. Her paper and a recorded version of her presentation are on our website if you're interested in learning more. We then worked with a master's student at Villanova named Colin McCrossan, who helped us pull together a more detailed plan for what the process would be to get the archives as part of our collection. From what I understand, this was the largest accession in the recent history of the Society. Almost exactly 2 years ago, a team, including our amazing administrative assistant, Paige Bartello, moved many, many boxes out of the basement of the Tribute House into a truck and a half-mile across town and up these stairs. She and I then wrote a proposal for a grant from the Pennsylvania Historical and Museum Commission to rehouse and process this collection, and we're so fortunate to receive that grant, which allowed us to work with today's speaker, Xandra O'Neill. Her internship was supervised by Paige. Before we hear from Xandra about all the work that she has done since May of last year, I'd like to invite Stephanie to give a few brief remarks on behalf of the club. Stephanie was born and raised in Bala Cynwyd. She lived on North Highland Avenue and made her way down Montgomery Avenue to Narberth, where she lives with her family. They are still members of St. Matthias Church. She served on the board of the Women's Club for many years and is their last president, overseeing the donation of historic materials and physical buildings. Welcome, Stephanie.
So I'm Stephanie. I worked with the Historical Society on really unearthing the materials that I wasn't really sure what we had. I knew we had a ton of stuff down there, but I didn't know what it was valuable, what wasn't valuable. And with the changing landscape of the way that the club was and what the needs were with the community, we really realized that, we're not kind of coming to this club as much as we were, and these materials definitely need to go somewhere else, and we need to be good stewards of what we have and pass it along and have it donated. And I'm really interested to see what the presentation is, because I didn't even know half of what was in there. So thank you so much for taking this on and taking the materials and getting it out there and getting it in front of everyone to see. That's what I got.
Thank you. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce today's speaker. Xandra O'Neill is a project archivist, genealogist, and writer, and a lifelong resident of Lower Merion. In 2024, she completed her master's in library science with a focus on local history and archives. She's currently nearing completion of her certification in Judaica and Hebraica librarianship through the Association of Jewish Libraries and the Jewish Theological Seminary. She sees herself as a protector of stories, using archival work, genealogical research, and writing to help ensure that the stories of the past survive for those in the future. While completing her master's degree, she did her internship here with us at the Historical Society, working on rehousing and processing our flat file collection, as well as creating a guide to the Jewish community of Lower Merion and Narberth. She presented some of this wonderful work at our annual meeting last year. We're so fortunate that she agreed to return to process the Women's Club of Bala Cynwyd collection. Today she'll be sharing a bit more about how the collection came to be here, her process, and most importantly, she'll be sharing highlights of the collection that underscore its research value to our community and beyond. Welcome, Xandra.
Thanks, everyone. And thank you, Stephanie, for helping get the materials here. The Women's Club was founded in 1912, so we had lots of materials to go through, and I'm just going to talk you a bit through my process and through some of the things that we found in the collection. So the first thing that I did when I started to work with the collection was to take a rough inventory of the entire collection to see what materials were there. So this was really a quick sweep through all of these boxes to see what information was here so I could start to understand what it was that I was going to be working with. And that helped me to create a processing plan. Then I started to go through box by box in more detail, and you can see, maybe you can see in the bottom right corner, lots of rusty staples and paper clips and brittle rubber bands, more than I ever would have imagined seeing. Needed to get that stuff separated from the material. And through this process, I started to rehouse the materials in archival folders and boxes, and started to put them into an order that would help researchers to be able to actually access and utilize the materials. So I thought the best way to work you through the collection is to talk to you about the series that make up the collection. So when you have a larger archival collection like this one was, it's helpful to break it up into series so you don't have people just going through boxes and boxes and folders. You want to make some sense of it. So I broke this collection up into 8 series. We had meeting minutes and reports, the antique show, scrapbooks and press books, finance, calendars, yearbooks, and club directories, administration and governance, photographs, and finally artifacts. So I'm going to walk you through these now and show some of the highlights and how the materials can be used. So the first series is the meeting minutes and reports, and these materials span 1913 through about 2000. And this includes board meeting minutes, executive committee meeting minutes, as well as annual reports from the club. And these materials really help to frame the rest of the collection. So the club's year ran from October until May each year, and you can see this through the meeting minutes as there's this gap in the summer months. The board meetings met twice a month, and the executive committee met once a month. And this part of the collection was relatively straightforward in terms of processing it because of the organization of the materials. This box here, I don't know how well you can see it, but there were these folders that were nicely labeled with dates, so I knew exactly what I was working through. It was a really good place to start processing the collection because I didn't have to think too much about what the materials were. It was very straightforward. The minutes and reports were kept together, and until 1960, the board and executive meeting minutes were actually kept separately. So there were different journals and folders for the executive meeting minutes. This shifted in around 1962, and they started keeping these together, and that's reflected in the way that the collection is organized. So if a researcher is looking in those first 50 years, they're going to see the board meeting minutes and the annual reports in folders together and the executive meeting minutes separate. And once the club started keeping them together, that's when you see them together. And this all really offered a framework for the club, the minutes did, and the annual reports offered a more detailed look at the different committees that the club had going on at any given time. What you see on the right here is an example of meeting minutes, and this one, dated November 5th of 1913, begins, the first meeting of the executive committee was held September 17th, 1913 at the residence of the president. So as you can see, it was very easy, even when the materials weren't necessarily, because sometimes they were just a bunch of papers in a box. They were mostly well organized for this part of the collection, but there were helpful dates to make sure I was able to see if there were particular months that might have been missing minutes that I needed to look for elsewhere as I moved through the collection. And for those doing research on a certain time period, such as Brea's work, which Erin talked about, this part of the collection is a really good starting point because you can focus on a particular time period and start to see what you're looking for there. So I want to share a couple of interesting finds from this series. So these were some of the first things I found. These were the reading lists. And in the 1912 to 1913 year and 1913 to 1914, they had recommended reading for each month that ran that October through May. And these were gathered by the book committee. And Edith Wharton, Helen Keller, and Joseph Conrad were some notable names on these lists. By 1914 and 1915, the lists became summer reading suggestions, and they became a little bit longer, and they also separated the titles out into different categories. So you have piece, plays, poetry, they had fiction, and lighter fiction, which some of us can relate to now, and we want those beach reads. So it was really interesting to see how this shifted. These lists I found with the meeting minutes through 1918. And this is 1916 lists. So they really, it was interesting to see that they were thinking about what the club membership would do during those summer months when they weren't meeting. And then one of the questions that came up when I was working on the materials, Erin asked me if there was any information about the time capsule that the club had put together. And I did find some meeting minutes about the laying of the cornerstone. In some cases, there was a written version, a handwritten version of the meeting minutes, and also a typed version, which is helpful for those in the future who might not be able to read the cursive as well as some of us in the room might be able to. And the time capsule is within one of the cornerstones, but what's helpful, since we can't dig that up, they did have meeting minutes that highlighted some of the things that were in there. There's a Bible of unknown edition and some coins, but additionally, there are things that we have in the collection. The Constitution and bylaws that put the club calendar in from November of 1926, plans for the building, a short history of the club. So even though we can't see if anything survived these 100 years in that time capsule, we have a sense of what they chose to put in there. So again, this really highlights the interesting ways that the meeting minutes can add to research. If you're looking for something specific, again, you have those time marks to be able to try to find what you're looking for. The second series features the materials from the antique show. So from 1945 until 2001, the club organized an annual antique show. And the materials in this series include newspaper clippings, reports, vendor contracts, programs, and posters. If you've ever put on a small event with vendors, or even a small event like this today, you know that it can be a lot of work. And I'm really amazed. It's such a testament to the club's dedication to this event and to the detail that went into it. Once you finish an annual event like this, you already have to be looking forward to the next one. And they did this consistently for such a long period of time, which I think says a lot about the work that the women were doing in this club. So here's an example of a couple of the posters. We don't have all of them, but many of them did survive. And then here's an example of one of the programs. And the programs are an incredibly rich part of this collection. There may be people who are doing research about antique shows and vendors in the region, but there's a lot of information about the history of Lower Merion and Narberth in here. Again, testament to the work that they put into this. There's a list of the committee members who put the show together. But then you get to the ads. And you get Ricklands, right? So we're going to remember Ricklands. But you also have ads here for Babbitt's Pharmacy, Gladwin Pharmacy, Jaime's, some of the places that we still have. I was really struck by this because there may not be other information. Maybe we look through phone books, but for people who are wanting to know what did Lower Merion and Narberth look like in the past, they can actually go to these programs and see which businesses in the area chose to advertise. And I want to draw your attention to the bottom left-hand corner. There's an ad for Charlie Hess's, which was a restaurant, and we're going to come back to that in a little bit. There's a story there.
What year was that?
That one was from 1969. So we don't have, the programs are a pretty complete collection, but there are a couple of years missing. Luckily, we have more of the programs than we do the posters, which I think the posters stayed pretty much the same as the years went on with the basic information, but the programs are just really a wealth of information. Another series that has a lot of informative stuff is the scrapbooks and press books. Again, this speaks so much to the importance the women of the club put on keeping track of the things that they did. So most of the materials in the scrapbooks and press books are newspaper clippings. So they were really keeping track of that stuff. And this is one example, and you can see this is just from one club year. They packed this really full. So what we had to do in this case, in the case of some of them, was actually remove them from the original bindings so that we could preserve them. We put them in archival boxes, and some of them will, when we're able to, get further conservation work done on them so that they can be accessible. But this is the type of thing that some of the pages in here, the glue is coming off, and you start to risk losing sheets if you don't do something to take care of it. So it's great that they were here. This is another one. The pages are already falling out, so that's one that I removed from the original binding as well. One of these I remember gave us a lot of trouble. I think it was the first one. It was so thick that the posts that were holding it together were just a lot of work to get out, but Paige and I made it happen. And then these are some covers from a couple of other ones. Now, they weren't all preservable like this. This, what you see here, is from the 1955 to 1956 scrapbook, and this was not salvageable. The condition was so poor, what you don't see in this picture, there were acetate sheets on this, and this required not just gloves but a mask to work with because the smell was quite unpleasant. But what we did in this case was we digitized these pages so we don't lose this part of the history from the collection, and so we don't lose all of the hard work that the members put into putting this together. The next series is the finance series, which is mostly what you would expect. It's mostly ledgers. Again, the level of detail they had, I'm sorry you can't see all of these. We're going to have all of these slides up on the website, so you'll be able to look at all of this in better detail in the future. But their ledgers spanned many years because they had them organized by different category meticulously, which I think it shows the amount of things that the club had going on, that they needed to have such thorough records, and the time and attention that they were willing to put into it. And now I told Erin this when I was here Thursday night getting some pictures, this might be my favorite part of the collection. In the finance collection, I came across these receipts from the National Bank of Narberth. You can see here, get the savings habit, open a savings account, and you have a little piggy bank. And we've got more. Life insurance loans, personal loans. I think this would be great for an art project in Narberth, popping all of these up all over the place. Home mortgages, traveler's checks, safe deposit box, automobile loans, Christmas club, and personalizing your checks. So this is an example of something that doesn't have to do with the Women's Club, that happened to be in the finance part of the materials, but this is a really rich piece of Narberth history that may be of interest to a lot of people. So now that this collection has been processed, and we know that this is here, it's more accessible for people who are doing this research. These were really a fun find. The next series consisted of calendars, yearbooks, and club directories. So while the scrapbooks really focused on a lot of newspaper clippings, what they chose to publicize, what things journalists were writing about the club's activities, this series has a lot of information that highlights the internal communications of the club. And these calendars span 1916 to 1980. And they were coming out, again, every month during that on-season, October through May. So they were compiling this information and getting these calendars out to their members so they knew what was happening in the clubs. On this one is recommended reading, so that this one's from 1940, so that harkens back to those early reading lists. Reading and coming up with recommendations for their club members was still an important aspect of what they were doing. The 6th series is Administration and Governance, and it begins when I decided how to organize this section, because it was kind of a catch-all in a lot of ways. I started with materials that were related to the state and county level women's club federations, because that gave a little bit more context to the Women's Club of Bala Cynwyd. It wasn't in existence on its own, it was part of this larger network. And then their materials like the Constitution and bylaws, papers related to the building, legal and general correspondence, things like that. And I think that this is really a rich series in terms of research because of how many different things there are in here. So let's take a look at a few. This letter is 3 pages long, and this is when I want to bring your attention back to Charlie Hess's. This is from 1952, and some of the first papers that I found were about a legal dispute involving the restaurant's application for a liquor license. The Women's Club did not want the restaurant to have a liquor license. The papers in this collection show neither did the township, neither did an area unnamed church. So there were some papers back and forth, and this is, in the top left corner here it says copy. So their copy of this letter they actually hand wrote and kept with their records. And this is talking about why they don't want the restaurant to have the license. There's another paper in there that talks about, wrote to the club members and said, we know you were thinking about securing a lawyer for this. We want to remind you, other people are working on this too, so you might not need to get the lawyer. Other people don't want this to happen. What I found fascinating though, when you go back to that program in 1969, clearly tensions had cooled enough for the restaurant to be advertising in the antique show program. The other thing I want to point out, when I was doing some research about this, because I got really curious, I didn't know what Charlie Hess's was, I found online a sample image of a menu from the restaurant, and it had some history of the restaurant, and in this history, it mentioned that the restaurant closed in the mid-1960s. The program I showed you was from 1969. So that tells us that this collection has significant research value in being able to, in some situations, corroborate other information that's out there, but possibly also to clarify some things. And when you're doing research, it's important not to just assume that the first thing you see is right. So I don't know who it is that's selling this print of the menu, where they got their information. There was a lot of biographical information about the family that owned that restaurant and others in the area. But an antique show program where they had to pay to put that ad into the program is proof that the restaurant was still active in 1969. So I didn't go back, this would be a great research project for someone, I didn't go back to see what other years Charlie Hess's might have advertised in the program and when the latest one was, but that would be something that someone could do to get a better idea if they were researching restaurants that used to be in the township, for example. Another part of the collection was the membership cards. So there were a few boxes of membership cards that I rehoused again, lots of staples and paper clips and rubber bands that were falling apart and sticking to some of the cards. And this gives us insight into the process of becoming a member of the club. So you needed to have a proposer, someone who was saying, I think this person should join the club, and you needed two people to second that. The early cards also listed husband's occupation and religious affiliation. The women's names in the women's club were subjugated to parentheses, which I found fascinating. Later on some of the cards, the husband's occupation and religious affiliation were crossed off, and some of the iterations of the cards don't have those listed. It's clear that this isn't a full collection, because in this case, Mrs. M. Brogan, who's Margaret Brogan, part of my extended family, is listed as a proposer, which means she must have been a member of the club, but there wasn't a card in the collection for her. So again, this is great if you have family or friends who you think were part of the club, or if you're researching someone who you think might have been part of the club, you could find some information there. This snippet here of newspaper is an example of something that's of high value, but also explains why parts of collections aren't always going to be open to the public. This is a newspaper that lists the people who donated to the Memorial Library when they were building the library. And it is in, unfortunately, really poor condition. It's folded. It would be, at some point, a conservator could open it up and see the names and things like that. There's a wealth of information there. But now that it's by itself in a folder and we know what it is, we can protect it so that if there's the possibility of conserving it later, we're able to do that. But it's a really good example of, some people may say, well, why can't I just come in and flip through everything you have? Well, this is a perfect example. If somebody flips through everything we have, they could cause more damage to this, and then it wouldn't be available to future generations. Okay, this is also kind of fun. This was a discussion by the club's citizen department. There wasn't a date on this. Again, you could probably figure it out through the meeting minutes. But I want to read these to you. I don't know if you can see them. I'll read them out to you. This was a discussion that they had relevant to the school board, and I don't know if anyone else in the room pays much attention to the school board these days. I do. Some interesting questions here. Do you think that women should serve on our school board? That our school system has defects as compared to others in this state or the best in other states? Our school plants are adequate, properly lighted, heated, ventilated. The subjects taught in the lower grades fit boys and girls for the normal responsibilities of life, and I'd be curious to know how they defined normal responsibilities of life. Do you think our teachers are well trained? Do you think military training is preferable to physical training in high schools? And there was one I forgot on my list, but it's on here. Do you think we need kindergartens in our schools? And for those of you who've been paying attention, we finally have full day K. So they asked this question many years ago. We finally got an answer to that one. So this just gives you a sense of the things that they were thinking about and discussing related to the community they lived in. Here's a sketch of the building, and I put this in here as representation of the materials in this series related to the construction and maintenance of the building. So there are materials from the architects when they were building the clubhouse, and there are papers about, replacing a boiler, things like that. Lastly in this collection is a series of postcards from 2006, and these were sent to members to vote about whether or not to continue the club. So as Stephanie alluded to, by the time we're in the 2000s, membership is dwindling, questions are starting to arise about what they should do. And the question posed on these cards was, should we continue as is, or should we disband? And they were clearly sent out in a way to allow for anonymous responses. So they could poll their members without, they might have known each other's handwriting by this point, I don't know, but you can tell by the lengthy responses and signatures on some of these that many members didn't feel the need to remain anonymous. But there were still a lot of questions here. There was definitely a split between, there were some people who really regretted to say that they felt like the club needed to disband. There were people who felt wholeheartedly that it should continue. There were people who felt like it should continue, but maybe some changes needed to be made. So all of these materials in this series, as you can tell, this series covers a lot, right? We're talking about architecture, membership, voting about what's going to happen next. So there's a lot there for someone who is working on or wants to dig into a research project. The 7th series is photographs, and this mostly consists of photos from the 1990s and 2000s, but I wanted to share a few photos before we were snapping a million photos and hoping for some good ones, because that is the bulk of the photograph collection. This one is from 1938, and it's Mrs. Russell Collin, and we know this because this paperwork was still with the photograph. This is a photo from 1955 of 2 women who were modeling, but we don't have names on this photo. Again, if someone knows that they had a family member who was, or if they themselves were a member in 1955, they could look through these and maybe identify people, and that could be helpful for us and future researchers as well. Here's the photo, Jamie. This photo is an example, again, of how the collection can teach us more about the community beyond just the Women's Club. I'm not sure what connection this has to the Women's Club, other than it was in with the collection, maybe somebody else knows. What's of interest to me is it's still on this original backing board, and it says Okada Studio on the side. So we know the photography studio, and that studio was in Ardmore. So again, this offers another glimpse into what's in this collection that we can learn about the community. And then finally, I just wanted to show you an example of some of the more recent photos. They were mostly still in there. You remember going to the drugstore and getting your film developed and let's see what worked, right? Most of them were still in those envelopes. They were labeled, which was helpful for the most part. I put them into these sleeves so that they are better protected from one another, and so they're easier to use and access. And again, I have some extended family in this photo, so I chose to use this page. The last series is Artifacts, and it's a smaller series. It includes the silver tray. It also includes the charter, which is in the back, and a trophy from the annual debate with the neighborhood club for the years 1931 to 1933. And I wanted to show the picture of the tray as an example of some of the decisions we make at a historical society or in an archival repository. I talked to Paige about this. I said, should we polish this so we can see what it says? You can see if you look really closely, it's from 1938. And she said the reason that we don't is because each time we polish it, it's going to cause more harm to that etching. So over time, it's actually going to degrade the item, and we don't really need to polish it. It's sitting in our collection. Somebody can come and look at it if they need to for research. They can see what's on it, but there's no need to risk further harming the material. So we went from these trunks of folders, and some of them were in really not great condition, all of these boxes, to this. We've got well-organized boxes in the office. We have boxes in the archive room with the scrapbooks and the photos. Putting those labels on and getting them on their shelves after working with this collection for many, many months was a really great feeling. Because what it means now is people can come in, Finding Aid is almost done. People will be able to come in and find what they're looking for with ease, and we can know that we've done a good job stewarding this collection because it's much better protected than it had been in the state that it was received in. So again, as I kind of just said, now it's safely housed and accessible to researchers, both for those who are looking to learn more about members of the club or who are researching this women's club, the wider web of women's clubs, or even Lower Merion and Narberth and the region. And I want to bring everyone's attention again to Brea's presentation. It is up on the website, as Erin mentioned, to be of use somewhere in France, because it was a really great example of how she looked at a specific time period in the meeting minutes and was able to see what the women were talking about in their monthly meetings and what they were doing. And it's just one example of how this can be used for further research. So I want to thank the Lower Merion Historical Society, especially Paige, for all of her help with bringing me in to process this collection, for Paige's help, to the other volunteers for being wonderful community on Thursdays and Fridays as we worked through various collections and all sorts of things. And I'm happy to take any questions that anyone may have. Thank you. Yeah, Linda.
What kind of cataloging did you do in addition to the rehousing and the organization of the materials?
Sure. So once I knew what the whole collection was going to look like, we used Past Perfect here. So I've been in the process of, I had an Excel spreadsheet that kept track of everything that was on here, and I put all of that into Past Perfect. So I just have to finish up the descriptions of all of the series. And then that's all going to be up on the website, so people will be able to see at the folder level what's in the collection. So they'll be able to see administration and governance. What does that mean? like what's in there, they'll be able to look box by box and see briefly what's in every folder. That way if somebody is looking through this on the website, and, oh, I'm interested in that, sends an email, and Paige gets it, she can pull, if somebody wants to come and look at something particular. Someone wants to review those programs from the antique show, for example. Now Paige is going to be able to go and pull those particular folders and bring them to the reading room, and somebody can look at them and do their research that way. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, so I understand that most of the materials are not digitized, so you just see
Correct.
this document exists. If you want to see it, you need to come.
Yes, the one
That's
exception.
a totally different project.
Yes, well, and the one exception to that is the scans that we did for that scrapbook that wasn't salvageable. When the finding aid goes live, those on the back end, those files are already attached to that item. So that will be available online. And yes, digitizing more things will definitely be. The photos you saw in here are not archival quality. These were, I came in Thursday and filled in some holes from things that I'd taken pictures of as I was working on things. Yeah.
Do you notice a difference in the amount of information or the types of things during the war years?
I didn't look that granularly at the collection because I was focused on organizing it and rehousing it. So when Brea came in, she was able to look at the particular dates of that, but they were still having their twice monthly meetings, and the executive committee was meeting once a month, things like that. So that stays consistent.
Anything else scaled back? Like, did you still have the antique show stuff?
Yeah, they still had, the antique show ran, unless there was a little detail that I missed, I'm pretty sure the antique show ran consistently. Stephanie, you can tell me if you know that I'm wrong about that.
It ran
Yeah.
until they decided not to do it anymore.
Which I'm so impressed with that, because that is not a small thing to put together. And looking at the materials, all of the contracts from the vendors, and getting, I want the same spot that I had last year, and is that something that they're gonna be able to manage? And do you want to participate again this year because we haven't heard back from you? All of that correspondence is there, so there's a lot of really interesting stuff in that collection. But again, I was kind of looking at kind of the big picture of the collection and making sure that the materials are available and accessible for people who want to come in and do more of that granular research like Brea did. Jamie.
Xandra, this is a comment, not really a question. As one of the multiple people somewhere in this room that came into the Women's Club and put stuff in boxes that we didn't know, just stuff that, I'm just so impressed at how the stuff that we saw that we didn't know what it was or what it meant, that you were able to synthesize all that through your research and tell us what these things were. So I just want to thank you for that.
Thank you. And I think what helped with that was the meeting minutes. I had, this I didn't put in the presentation, but I had a couple of folders labeled miscellaneous. So they're loose pages that seemed like these might be meeting minutes, these might be from this, these might be from that. I have no idea what this is from and if it's relevant to anything at all. And that miscellaneous folder got smaller and smaller and smaller. And at some point I remember I said to Paige, I was like, am I done? Like, do I have to keep figuring out where these things are going to go? We can have a small miscellaneous folder. That's. I think I figured out by the end where to fit everything in. But having those meeting minutes kind of as the structure for what the club did, just on a month-to-month basis with how they ran their meetings. The fact that they ran October through May, and then you had the club calendars, which give, again, a little bit more context that way. You can start to see the collection, the processing plan I put together was pretty similar to what we ended up with. And when I talk about processing plan, it's when I first looked at the materials, what series do I anticipate having? That changed a little bit, but for the most part it stayed because there were a couple of things, we thought there might be some sub-series. There wasn't enough material to warrant separating the finance ledgers from other, like bank receipts and things like that. There just wasn't enough material. This was 37 linear feet, so for context, those boxes that you saw on the shelves, which I think we ended up with 8 of, each box is considered to be a linear foot. So this collection with the scrapbooks and everything was 37 linear feet. If this had been a 50 or 100 or 200 linear feet size collection, we certainly would have seen sub-series because there would have been more information about each thing. Dennis, I saw your hand.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to, the thing that really strikes me in addition to, well, really because of the wonderful work that you did was, it makes me think of how this is a really special collection, and it's a collection that might not have survived, and usually doesn't survive. You know how many collections like this end up in dumpsters every single day? It's incredible. So to have this record preserved is remarkable. And I want to have a shout out to Stephanie, because without Stephanie, this thing could have been gone. And just like so many other resources, so it takes people taking the right action at the right time, otherwise none of this stuff happens. So, you know, it's this whole chain of events that leads us to having a preserved collection, and now people can come in and use and come to understand our community better because of it. So I want to thank every little cog and every wheel that you know makes this happen. So and Stephanie, it started with you. So thank you.
Absolutely, and I hope that having done this, and this, you can all go and share this with people, and it'll be on the website, and people will know about this, and I hope that helps. I think what happens sometimes is people that have a collection, they don't know what to do with it, or they think, no one's gonna want this, because they can't necessarily see, oh, bank receipts, why do I need to keep bank receipts? Well, those National Bank of Narberth receipts are pretty cool. Right? A lot of people might not know that there was a National Bank of Narberth. Right? Those are the things that get lost. And when the Historical Society proves itself to be a good steward of collections like these, it opens the door for more people to come in and say, we have something that we think, we don't know, maybe there's nothing here, but can you look at this and see if there's some history here worth saving? And I can't take care of it in my home, or I'm downsizing, and I will take this moment to remind people, do not keep things, if you can help it, in basements and attics and garages, because those are the places where we're gonna lose history most. Linda.
I know there's some people in the room who used to be in the women's club, Gilda Kramer, my neighbor. Is there anybody else here who were members of the women's club when it was, and Stephanie, of course?
He was Bala.
Yeah, you were.
I was very short.
You joined it at the end?
Yes.
You used to talk to me about it.
We tried to revitalize it, but I wasn't really known.
Oh, just, okay. I
Got
misunderstood.
married there.
Oh, you got married there?
Yeah,
Sarah, wow.
but I was a member towards the last couple of years.
I thought you would.
So were there any physical artifacts left? Like, did they not take photographs of the yearly officers? Was there not some formal, there are officers?
I really wish that, there are lists in the meeting minutes and the calendars and things like that. I wish there were more I kept hoping there were gonna be
We
more.
had damage too.
Yeah.
So when you're saying don't keep things in basements, that boardroom, that wall that was, I don't know if you were actually down there, but there was one wall that was torn out, there was a leak. And a lot of those trunks were just underwater because I don't even know how long it was getting poured on. Just we weren't there every single day to watch it, and came in and was like, oh, this is a mess. So there was a lot that was tossed too, and you know, there was a ton, but
Yes.
there was a lot that just had to go because it was all molded.
And I can imagine like that scrapbook that was in bad shape. It was like, okay, let's see if we can carefully scan these images, because it was a shame, especially because it was a piece of this bigger collection, to lose it. But I don't know if you were here the days I was working on that, but that was not pleasant to smell.
I have a question about, were there programs sponsored? Like when I was in 4th or 5th grade, I went to the cotillion there. And I didn't know if the women's club sponsored that, or whether that was something that the community.
Women's Club sponsored that, and
And the
then
ballet.
the ballot, well, the picture that you had with the girls in the stripes,
Mm-hmm.
there were dance classes there.
Mhm.
So
Okay.
I
I
assumption
thought that was your fact.
Yeah.
that that's, no, it was not.
Not the gay bashes.
But it's assumption that that could have been a dance class. That was
Sure.
there. And those were things, and towards the end of the club, there was ballet, there was a karate studio operating out of there for, you know, monetary purposes to kind of like keep the roof from not leaking. So that was there, but it wasn't necessarily club sponsored. But years ago, there were club sponsored activities like.
I think that would be really interesting to look into too. I bet you there are a lot of people,
Yeah.
like here I am, you know, 5th grade, and they played all waltz, and, you know, Jimmy didn't go, as you can tell by her dance style. But
There are some cotillion records, I think that's in the finance section, because I think it was more the finance side of the cotillion. There are a bunch of bowling records for people who are in the bowling club. But there wasn't a consistent amount. What's not in the collection, this may have been stuff that got lost or that just wasn't housed with the collection, were regular and consistent meeting minutes for each of the committees. So in the annual reports, you kind of get an overview of this is what this committee did over the last year, but you don't have that day-to-day sense of what they were doing and the behind-the-scenes part of it. So that's lost a little bit. But in the 90s and 2000s photographs, there are some from a Nutcracker production that they did there. And there are some photos from a couple of weddings and other events that weren't women's club events, but that were held in the space. So in terms of looking at who was in the picture, there's not necessarily value there, but it teaches someone who's looking at the materials, they were renting this space out. And it's interesting too, when you go back to the liquor license dispute with Charlie Hess's, in more recent years, they had some clashes with some of the neighbors because of noise and parking and things like that when they were renting the space out. So you see two sides of that happening with the club over time. Gilda.
Who was Charlie Hess's?
Where Aldar is now.
Where Aldar
Next to
is.
the
Okay.
casino.
I looked it up, I was like, what's that address? It's Aldar.
Yeah, the average for Hymies and Bricklands, was that also from the 60s or that was earlier?
The program?
Program.
Yeah, that was from '69.
That was also.
Yeah. So it's again, it's interesting to see, and someone could go through these, were the same businesses, and probably the ones right
Right.
in the immediate area were gonna place ads because,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
especially the restaurants,
Ballast,
like, oh,
pharmacy.
people are at the antique show, well, they're gonna be hungry,
Yes.
so maybe they'll see this and pop over and grab something to eat. But it would be interesting to see, again, like, do when certain businesses stop advertising correlate with when those businesses closed,
Yeah,
which may or may not be the case.
right.
And if it's not the case, it just raises this probably unanswerable question of, well, if this business was placing ads for 5 or 6 or 10 years, why did they stop? We could ask a million questions, right? And what's nice about a collection like this is it opens up a million questions to be asked. And there are going to be people out there who are going to ask questions that none of us in the room would think to ask. But the materials are now there for them to access.